Are you recording today? I thought this is just a.
Hello, my name is Yvonne. I'm from JK Lifestyle with Yvonne. Today we're meeting with Avram Weiss. He talks about how men have fears of women. So I wanted to talk about that and explore that. I have Mr. J, who's an interpersonal relationship coach and betrayal trauma practitioner. And also today, I have Mr. Jonathan Steele. He's a partner at the law firm Bierman in Chicago, Illinois. So he's a family law attorney. How's everybody today?
Good.
Just grand.
Okay.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. Okay, I wanted to start with Mr. Weiss. Why do you say men have fear of women? What are the fears
Well,
that they could possibly have?
yeah, that's exactly the question. Why would men possibly be scared of women? Um,
Mhm.
I'm gonna I'm gonna expand your question a little, if I may, if you'll indulge me,
Mhm.
because I just came from an experience that I'm kind of hopped up about, um,
Okay.
and I think it relates. Um, I've written for Psychology Today for 4 years. In that time, they've rejected one article, and they rejected it twice just an hour ago. And that article was about what I called male bashing. And it's examples from the culture and social media and my profession about what I think are prejudice about men. And it's the first article in 4 years that Psychology has today has rejected, and they rejected it twice. I made the edits they requested. So I asked myself, why would a national publication not want to publish an article about prejudice about men? Well, I think it's too hot to handle. I think it's controversial. I think it makes people uncomfortable. And I think there is a social trend going on both in the culture and in intimate relationships to be very critical of men in some subtle and not some subtle ways. So I think that's one of the things that men are afraid of is that they see that after centuries and millennia of being in a privileged, powerful position, are beginning to experience what it's like to be the target of bias and criticism.
So you think it's more on a professional level as opposed to a personal level in
No, I
relationships?
no, I think it's all the above. So, for example, one of the things I talked about in the article is the current preoccupation in the culture with the topic of narcissism, or what I very impolitely refer to as the new N word. So, if you go online, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of articles about narcissism, and they're all articles about warning people about how to spot a narcissist and how to make sure you don't end up in a relationship with a narcissist. But the assumption in these articles are two assumptions. One is it's almost all women writing to other women, and the implication is that the narcissists they're discussing are all men, which of course is not true. And the other is that narcissism is somehow an untreatable condition that should be shunned and run away from. But 50 years ago in my field, the literature was full of articles about how to effectively treat people with narcissistic personality disorder. So it went from being a problem that people have in life to like a disease that's communicable and you should stay as far away from as you possibly can. So it's in the profession, it's in the culture, it's in social media, it's everywhere.
Mhm. Anybody else want to add to that?
I can tell you as a divorce lawyer, almost every client that walks into my office tells me that their spouse is a textbook narcissist. And I brush it off because everyone says it to me. And I tell people that, like, okay, stop with the buzzwords and just tell me what's happening. Stop putting a term on it. And then it's quickly followed up with, no, I'm telling you, he's a textbook narcissist, as though I'm supposed to do something with that information, as though that's going to change the way that like I practice or direct their case. And people seem really interested in throwing that label out there, gaslighting, things like that. The buzzwords they think are really important to slap onto a situation. I think Describing the behavior is much more valuable. Describing the person's actions more than slapping a label, but the label makes its way into every new client meeting.
Can I ask, is that men and women or is that mostly women?
It's both.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think sometimes people believe that when you come in and say, "Oh, my soon-to-be ex is a narcissist," they think you have some file that's like, "Okay, this is the narcissist expert. Okay, this is the one size fits all. Thank you for telling me that. I got it from here." When, yeah, I believe it is it's sad because like anything else, I think so many things have been perverted,
Yeah.
and watered down and such. But getting back to Avram, something you were saying is, in a way, it's kind of too bad if just going on with what you said as far as the pendulum swinging. It's too bad that there couldn't be more of an inclusive thing. Why does it have to be the pendulum swinging? It could be let's all get involved here. But I understand the systems are the systems as well.
Well, I think people think of it as a get out of jail free card. Oh, he's a narcissist. Oh, of course you had to leave the marriage. That we don't
Yeah. Oh,
question
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
decision. Right. You had 12 affairs, but he's a narcissist. That's why you left the marriage, is because, right. So what's interesting historically, and this is a little geeky, forgive me, whatever. Um, I've been around the field long enough, and you stick around long enough, you get to see how things go over time. So 50 years ago, it was men complaining about women who were borderline personality. And all the professional literature was filled with articles warning people about people who are borderline. And it was the same thing. It was not how do you treat people with borderline personality, which of course you can, but how to stay away from them, how to keep them out of your life, how to get them out of your life if they end up in your life, the same kind of hysteria, but that was men's prejudice against women. And now it's interestingly, I think, gone, as you say, the pendulum. Now we're hearing women's outrage about men. It's cloaked under the title of narcissism. Let me shut this door. Hold on.
Okay. I just wonder how do men perceive women? Like if they see a woman and maybe she's attractive, or say a woman that is their boss that they may feel intimidated with, how would they behave toward her?
In what particular context? Like what?
Okay, you know what I was really concerned about, because I
Yeah, just
raised
say
this
what
the
you mean.
last time we talked. When you were talking about men have fear of women, how is a woman supposed to treat him? How
Uh,
is a woman supposed to behave toward him?
okay. That's a great question. Now I understand where you're coming from.
Hmm.
It's fairly like most things in my world. They're simple, not easy. So when I describe them as being simple, then people think that means I'm saying they're easy. And it's not easy, but it is simple. Um, the best analogy I know, so the answer to your question is that it has to do with pacing, that women tend to move at a faster pace. Women tend to be more comfortable with their inner lives and their feelings. So in conflict with men, women tend to be move to a more emotional depth faster than men are comfortable doing. So a lot of the answer to your question really has to do with pacing, really has to do with being sensitive to the other person's timing and pacing, how fast they're ready to go further in the conversation and not getting too far ahead of them because then people get defensive. And what I like to say to couples is the good news is you already know how to do this. Because if you have a sexual relationship, you've already figured out that you have different pacing and you've already figured out how to communicate with each other and be sensitive to each other's patterns and pacing. So if you're a couple, you've probably already figured this out. It's just you figured out in the bedroom. Now you need to do the same thing for your emotional life. But you already have the skills.
Anyone else have anything to add on to that?
The
Just said
bedroom
start the
pacing thing
conversation.
seems pretty astute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as they say, the easiest part is starting the fire, but the hardest part is keeping the flame. So I think, that initial pacing strategy will work, but yeah, the maintaining that I think is quite the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where, so I want to come back to your question just a while ago about what are women supposed to do. One of the things I've been pleasantly surprised by is that women's understanding this question of men being afraid rather than thinking about men as withholding and in a power struggle and trying to take advantage of them. Once women sort of get this idea that men are also afraid, that awareness alone changes more than you could imagine. It often is enough to shift women from a sort of critical position to an empathic position, like, oh, I understand why you're behaving the way you behave. You're actually scared. You're actually intimidated. You're actually unsure of yourself. And then when you're with somebody who's scared, you don't tend to be aggressive. You tend to sort of bring things down a level and be sensitive to their fears.
One of the things that I was thinking about is when you were talking about fears and stuff, and usually if you know someone is fearful or have apprehensiveness and everything else, you're more understanding. You are more flexible with things and everything. But how do you know that somebody is really fearful in a real way rather than just trying to manipulate? Because who wants to, you meet somebody and say within a week, there they are, I'm vulnerable, here are my fears. Well, what are you supposed to do with that person? Me, myself, I turn and run. But I'm just saying that how do you know that that is truly sincere, somebody who's sincere and not somebody that's just trying to manipulate you?
You don't. And there are two ways to approach that dilemma. But that's not true. That's true not, of course, just of men, but in any situation with any human being, you don't know that. That's always a risk.
True.
So there are two ways to live life, and in knowing that's true, there are two ways to approach that. One is to lead with your fears, to not invest or risk until you know that something's safe, to be very careful. But the problem is, it's almost impossible to love from that perspective.
Mhm.
And the other perspective is to be more open, to be more vulnerable, to take more risks, and know that sometimes people will hurt you. And that's the cost of living with an open heart. That to me is an acceptable cost. Occasionally somebody will take advantage of me, and I'm like, okay, they got me. But I get to live in the world as a loving, caring person all the 99% of the rest of the time. And the 1%, you got me.
I
Okay.
think anytime we're in a relationship with anyone, there's a great potential to be hurt and offended and all this. It's just like, listen, you can't take any professional baker and not expect them to get burned at
Right,
some point.
right,
But hopefully they don't stop baking and creating
right,
the beautiful dishes they do.
right.
They you come to the table with different tools, different understanding. But I think vulnerability is a great a great tool, if for lack of a better term, because I always say you can't come to the negotiation table armored up.
Yeah.
There will be no peace treaty. You got to come vulnerable. But you first have to be comfortable with who you are, and then certainly be comfortable with the person that you're trying to negotiate some type of peace with as well.
I think it's 90% of murders are committed by someone who is intimate to you. It's not strangers. That's why all this hysteria about safety is so misplaced because it ain't somebody you don't know is going to kill you. It's somebody you know really well who's likely to kill you. Who else would you be more likely to kill than your spouse? I mean, who do you get that angry at, or your kids? Um, the more intimate a relationship is, the more all kinds of feelings you have, and that includes anger.
Do you see that happening a lot in your law profession?
I don't see a lot of the murdering, but I think that's true. I think, passion, it goes both ways.
Right.
If you're passionate and you love someone, then you'll be passionate and hate that same person. I tend to see the latter more often than the former, but I see it pretty passionate in my profession.
Okay, well, while I have some men here, I want to ask you some questions.
Uh-oh.
Okay. What are some red flags that would let somebody know that they're wasting their time on the wrong guy? I
Just
want to
guy.
hear from guys.
Oh,
Hmm?
you only want it about guys. You don't want it both
Well, I
ways.
was going to ask women your opinion on women, but I
Okay.
wanted if you want to give it to me for both of them at this time, just tell me which one you're going to talk about first.
Well, I don't think it's any different for men and women. So that's why I was asking. I
Okay.
think I have an unusual, perhaps, opinion about that. I used to be a consultant for the largest matchmaking company in the country. So I did a lot of this kind of work and a lot of dating advice and columns and things like that. And I think the biggest mistake people make is they decide on a criteria in advance, and then as soon as they see anything that smells like that criteria, like they'll say, "Oh, I'll date anybody but a narcissist," and then the guy, takes his ice cream cone before he gives her one. Say, "Oh, he's a narcissist. That's it. We're done." And you're going to break up with everybody you date with that approach. Absolutely. If not right away, you're going to eventually. So what I always tell people is it's not when something happens that you don't like that is should be a red flag. The red flag is when you go to the person and you say, I didn't like the way that went, and then they act like an ass, that's the red flag. But if you go to them and you say, I didn't like the way that went, and they say, Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, tell me more, that's not a red flag. That's a green flag. Oh, that's good. You listen, you're not defensive, you respect how I feel. So that's where people go wrong is thinking that there's a red flag. There's no red, I mean, I guess if he brings a gun on the first date or something like that, but there are very few red flags other than violence I can think of. The red flags are all, how does it go when you talk about something you didn't like?
Mr. J.
You know, so listen, I think one of the things men have to be careful of is, and I'm going to get really basic and real and raw, is men are very visual. And a lot of times we like to think with the head that's behind our zipper, not the one that's coming out of our collar. And we have to be very mindful of that. A
Mhm.
lot of times we have what's called I forgot the term, but we will fit somebody into a box because we will talk ourselves into they have all the characteristics and virtues and things that I like, but really it's a we're fitting them into that box because maybe they're visually attractive. One of the things I tell people all the time is you got to be very careful. Well, first of all, when we date on the level of our self-esteem. So make sure that you're working on yourself and your self-esteem is pretty good because you want to make sure you're with somebody that's complementary as far as various things. But be very mindful of intuition and gut well over your heart and mind, and I always say that usually ego speaks in like sentences and paragraphs, and our gut, our intuition speaks to us in Morse code, in bullet points. So red flags aside, trust your gut because that talks on an energy level, and that's something that you want to really get in touch with and be mindful of, and try not to see some cleavage and say this is the woman for me. There's much more uh than that, of
Can I follow up on that?
course.
Sure.
So you said men tend to think with the little head instead of the big head.
I
They
agree
have
with
tendency.
them.
Yeah, but why is the question. We all agree with that, but then we never ask the next important question, which is why. And I think most of what we think about that is wrong. I think most people would answer that question by saying men have a stronger libido than women, and I do not think that's true.
Hmm.
I think for men, there's an old saying that says women have to feel loved to have sex, and men have to have sex to feel loved. And I think there's a lot of truth in that saying. So I think for many men, sex is the only channel through which they are able to take in attachment, validation, caring, tenderness, and love. And so the urgency that you feel from men about sex is not because they're thinking sexually, but because they don't have friends. They don't have, as you say, Mr. J, they don't have good self-esteem. The only way good stuff's coming in through their life is through sex. All the eggs are in that basket, and that's the urgency that you're feeling. And as evidence from my position, I would submit that if it were just about libido, men would just masturbate all the time and not be bothering their wives for sex. If it were just about orgasm, they would just go take care of themselves and not be so upset about not having enough sex with their partner. It has to be about more than just libido.
And this is one of the mistakes I think, because I work with couples repairing and rebuilding after broken trust is a lot of times when men will step out of the relationship for various reasons, because their wounds are speaking louder than their logic. And then they have a tendency usually when they're trying to repair and rebuild, well, to get back into sex with their primary partner. And that's because that's how they show love. That's how they protect them. But the female in that case, if we're talking about a male-female couple, the female in the case, that's the last thing she wants. So absolutely. So the mind can get clouded and with this. So absolutely, 100%.
But it's where couples get confused and they don't know how to work on this because they think it's all about sex and sexual frequency, and they dog with a tail chasing its tail. It just goes round and round and round, never gets any better. And if you understand that it's about attachment, then there are lots of ways besides sex that you can feel attached and close and connected. And when one person doesn't want to have sex, there are other ways to feel connected. And when you go down that road, it's much more workable.
Mhm.
You have anything to add to that, Mr. Steele?
So I'll answer your question of the red flags, and I'm going to put them in buckets. The first bucket I'll tell you I think is a red flag is a financial bucket. So I think within that, having secrecy around finances can be a red flag. I think being controlling about money can be a red flag. And then I think just having like different financial values. So whether you're a saver and he's a gambler, that can be a red flag for the relationship itself. I think another red flag can be in the bucket of, I don't know, control or respect. Um, so I think if the person you're pursuing is isolating you from your support system, they don't want you to be involved with your family. I think that's can be a red flag. Um, Somewhere along the way, I heard something about for every negative thing you're told about yourself, it has to be counterbalanced with five or so positive things. And so if there's an overwhelming number of jokes that are made at your expense that aren't paired with enough positive things to outweigh that, that can be a red flag. Um, Jealousness, possessiveness, if he's looking through your phone, if he's questioning you, talking to coworkers, things like that, I think that can be a red flag. And then I think the bucket of just sort of like conflict. So how do you engage with each other? How do you resolve conflict? If you don't resolve conflict and you just sort of sweep conflict under the rug, that's probably a red flag. Fighting dirty. If everyone else is the problem and every story you hear about his exes are like she was a terrible person, she was always at fault, she was always to blame, she was an idiot. That can be a red flag. And then I think within that sort of like conflict or character bucket is how he treats people he doesn't need to treat well. So if he takes you out to a fancy dinner and he treats the service staff or the valet drivers as though they're beneath him, it should be a red flag to most people. So I try to put that in buckets, gave you a couple examples of each. And I think it's dependent on the woman as far as which of those, if any, are red flags. But I see those as potential red flags.
The 5-to-1 ratio that you're referring to, I think probably comes from the research of the Gottman Group, who
Sure.
found that it takes for every negative interaction in a relationship, it takes 7 positive
Seven.
actions
Yeah.
to undo, which is really something you want to let couples know. Like maybe don't be so casual about being a jerk to your spouse, because then you have to be nice 7 times to just get back to square one. So
Yeah.
think about the words that come out of your mouth and the way you treat somebody, because it's a lot of work to undo one careless, hurtful thing.
And your
I think
spouse should never be the brunt of your joke, especially when you're around company. It's one thing if you're behind closed doors and you have your little language between yourself, but when you're in company, around company, your spouse should never be the brunt of your joke. And I'll tell you another thing too, when it comes to male-female relationships, um, I have a tendency to be slightly old-fashioned as far as the finances go, but I would like to make sure that women are offering every step of the way. The man can say, "No, I got it, we're good," or whatever, or once in a while. But if there's an expectation financially, absolutely, without question, I think that's a red flag for men. And the other thing too is, I think couples from the get, and it should be an evolving conversation, is to set rules and guidelines and protocol. Like, what is our definition of privacy? What is our definition of secrecy? Then once we start merging closer together, that should be an evolving conversation.
Yeah.
I think you're right that it was Gottman, and maybe I'm just hyperbolic by trade, but I think the 7-to-1 is like a good general rule. But I think depending on what the one is, it could be
Yeah.
1 billion to
Could be a
one,
big
and
thing.
it
Yeah.
won't outweigh it. If that one thing is I hate everything about you and I'm waiting until you die, then you could say all the nice things in the world and it's not going to make up
I'm
for it.
so glad you said that.
Absolutely. And it
I'm
could
so
come
glad you
down to
said that.
the insecurities of certain people, certain love languages of certain people, people's belief systems. So, absolutely. Yeah, I think the Gottmans is just a general rule of thumb, which is a great general rule of thumb. But absolutely, I think it's couple specific as well.
I'm really glad you said that, and I wish more couples understood what you said, because people sometimes in marital conflicts or relationship conflicts say the most god-awful things. And I know this because they say them in my office. And I model for them, I don't allow that. I'm very quick to step in and say, you will not talk to somebody that way in my office. That this is an office for people to get well and love and care about each other. We don't do that here. You can do that at home on your own dime, but I'm not going to tolerate you talking. Or the other way I'll approach it is particularly with men, or it really could be either one. They'll say something really awful and I'll ask them, help me understand where you're going here. Like, follow that comment you just made out 3 or 4 steps and tell me how you were thinking that was going to be helpful.
And what do they say?
They realized pretty quickly that they weren't thinking it was going to be helpful, that they were just indulging, dumping some bile inside of them. And I've challenged them and say, well, why are you saying things that you know are not going to be helpful? You came here, you're taking your time and paying your money to get help for your relationship. Why would you say things that you already know are going to be a hurt?
Mhm. Have you ever had couples come in there for counseling because they say they want to keep their marriage or relationship together, but it doesn't help? I mean, they still end up separating because the what's going on is, I guess, too deep.
Well, of course, absolutely. I'd like to think that happens less now than it did when I was newer in the profession, but it really has to do with when people come in. Sometimes people come in and the ship has sailed. They've really, one or both of them have really already made a decision, and they're sort of there to cross the T's and dot the I's. They're sort of there to say, well, we tried therapy, but they've really already made. And that's usually when things end in divorce, it's usually because one or both of them have kind of already, they're just mailing it in. They're not really there to work on it.
Mhm.
I'm really, I think one of the wonderful things in life is the resilience of couples. And I'll be interested to know your perspective because we're working on very different ends of the continuum here. But I'm always impressed with when couples are really willing to talk honestly to each other from the heart. I'm impressed with how they work things out, things that seem just they couldn't possibly be resolved. If people are really willing, there are very few things that people can't figure a way through.
Well,
Did you
our
want to hear
time
from
is just
Jonathan?
about up. Our time is just about up. But does anyone have any closing things they'd like to say? It's been interesting.
I'll just say this. In my professional life, I have not met a couple that have come to my office with a tremendous amount of water under the bridge, where if both of them were determined to make it work and they have a stick-to-itiveness, there's no amount of water under the bridge they can't swim through at all. I think it's like anything else. If you give two people the all the stuff to build a house, but they don't have a blueprint and directions, it's very difficult. Oftentimes, when couples come and see a mental health professional, a lot of what they need is believe it or not, just some instructions. And then once they have a blueprint or some protocol or rules or instructions on how to build a good marriage, just like you would build a good house, they can move mountains and make mountains.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to say, Mr. Steele?
It's inspiring to hear that people can come back from anything. I see some divorces, they, dismiss their case and they go into therapy and it works and they reconcile and I never hear back from them again. And I'm happy whenever that happens. As much as people don't like lawyers and you think it's bad for business, it's good to hear when something like that happens. I'm always amazed to see a couple is able to get over something like infidelity, because for a lot of people, I think that would be almost insurmountable. And, I'm hearing from some professionals today that if they're determined, they can get past it. So
All the
it's
time.
it's good to hear.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, I think we have a crisis around, I know we have a crisis around marriage, and Mr. Steele, you of course know better than any of us. But I think that crisis is about we have an old form for marriage that is outdated and not working, and we haven't yet figured out what the new form is. Marriage, until relatively recently, had a lot to do with economic dependence. Women were the ones who initiated marriage, and they did it because their economic circumstances improved significantly if they were married. Of course, what they didn't look at was the statistics about the number of women who live below the poverty level after they're divorced. But that's not working to hold marriages together anymore because women's income is rising and women don't have to worry about it. They can take care of themselves financially without a man. So that's not going to be the reason, financial dependence is not going to be the reason that families stay together. And we haven't figured out yet what is. And so we have this divorce rate that we have because we're in transition and people are trying to figure out, well, if it's not money, it's not security, then what would hold us together? What would be the core of our family? And I think it's an exciting time because I think young people are going to be the ones to figure that out, not me. And I'm really interested to see. I love being around young people, particularly young couples, because I love to see how they're doing it. They're very creative and innovative, and they're doing all kinds of.
It is, but I'll tell you, I feel bad sometimes for young couples because they love popping that hopium. And I'll tell you, the Disney movies of uh, love is going to get us through everything. In a course of a 40, 50, 60-year marriage, you're not always going to feel love.
No,
So, what else? So yeah, I agree with you. I'm interested to see this next development because the marital landscape is changing. Absolutely.
yeah, because
Okay.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Hurry up and finish
Well,
before we get
as
cut
a
off.
society, we need families. Our culture is built and depends on families to raise children. Now, you can do it differently, and maybe we will, but we haven't figured out what that is yet. And unless we figure out another way to sort of be the base of our society, we need intact families.
That's true. Today, I'd like to thank Mr. Jonathan Steele, Mr. J, and Mr. Avram Weiss for joining me today. This is
Thank
Yvonne
you.
from JK Lifestyles with Yvonne. Goodbye, everyone.